You ever get that feeling in your gut, like something is really, really wrong? That kind of feeling you can't shake, no matter how much you try to convince yourself that everything is fine. Yeah, that's how this story starts. My name's Tom, and I've lived through something so terrifying that no matter how much I try, I just can't forget it. A night I wish never happened, in a basement that still haunts me to this day. Before I get into it, let me ask you something. Do you believe in the supernatural? Ghosts, spirits, things we can't see, but somehow know are there? I'm curious because by the end of this story, I think you might change your mind. And hey, let me know where you're watching this from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. It was a Friday night when it all started. Me and two of my friends, Mike and Sarah, had just moved into this old house. We'd just graduated, looking to start fresh with new jobs in the city. The house wasn't in the best condition. It was old, with creaky floors and this weird, musty smell that you just couldn't ignore. But it was cheap, and that's all that mattered at the time. Now, Sarah. She's always been the practical one, the kind of person who doesn't get scared easily. And Mike, well, he was the joker of the group, always trying to lighten the mood, no matter how weird things got. As for me, I guess I've always been the quiet observer, just going along with whatever craziness came our way. But there was something about that house, something none of us wanted to talk about. The basement. We were told about it by the landlord when we first moved in. He didn't say much, just gave us one warning. Don't go into the basement. We laughed it off. I mean, come on, how much of a cliché can you get? It sounded straight out of a horror movie. But as the days went by, that warning started to bother me. There was something off about the house. Small things at first. The way the floorboards creaked, even when no one was walking. How the lights flickered for no reason. But the worst part was the noises. Every night, without fail, we'd hear something coming from the basement. Scratching sounds, like something was moving down there. Whispering, like voices too faint to make out, but just loud enough to keep you awake. Mike and Sarah brushed it off. Old houses make noises, they'd say, but I couldn't shake it. That basement door, it felt like it was watching us. One night, I'd had enough. Mike was out with some friends, and Sarah had gone to bed early. I was alone, and that feeling, that gnawing sense of dread, was stronger than ever. I grabbed a flashlight, made my way to the basement door, and stared at it for what felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding. I knew I shouldn't, but I had to know. I had to see what was down there. The moment I opened the door, a wave of cold air hit me. It was like stepping into a freezer. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I slowly made my way down, the flashlight flickering in my hand. The air smelled rotten, like something had been left to decay for years. When I reached the bottom, I saw it. The basement was way bigger than I expected. Old furniture was scattered around, covered in thick layers of dust and cobwebs. And in the far corner, there was something. At first, I thought it was a shadow cast by my flashlight, but then it moved, quick, almost too quick to catch. But I know what I saw. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Whatever it wasn't human. My flashlight flickered again, and in that brief moment of light, I saw it. An outline, dark, almost like smoke, but solid enough to make out. And then, it disappeared. Just gone. I didn't waste any time. I bolted back up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that the darkness was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The next morning, I told Mike and Sarah what I saw. Sarah rolled her eyes, said I was probably just tired and seeing things. Mike, though, he didn't laugh. Not this time. He'd always been the guy to make jokes about everything, but I could see it in his eyes. He was freaked out, too. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew something wasn't right. Over the next few days, things got worse. Lights would flicker on and off at random. Doors would open by themselves. At night, we'd all hear footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming from the upstairs floor. But every time we went to check, nothing was there. Then, the real nightmare began. We were all sitting in the living room watching a movie, trying to ignore everything that had been happening. It was almost like we were pretending nothing was wrong, hoping that if we ignored it, it would go away. But suddenly, the power cut out. Complete darkness. Mike grabbed his phone, used the flashlight, and that's when we heard it. The basement door creaking open. At first we thought maybe it was the wind, but then we heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. We all froze. Sarah whispered, "Who's there?" But no one answered. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped, just outside the living room door. My heart was in my throat. We were all too scared to move. Then, the door slowly creaked open. The beam from Mike's phone flickered and revealed nothing. No one was there. The footsteps had stopped, but the door was wide open, as if something had been standing there, watching us. I don't know what it was, but from that night on, things in the house were different. We tried to ignore it, tried to convince ourselves that we were just imagining things, but the truth was, something was in that house with us, and it was getting bolder. It wasn't just noises anymore. It wasn't just footsteps. It was something else. Something that wanted us gone. But the scariest part, we couldn't leave. Every time we tried to pack up and get out, something would happen. A door would slam shut. Our car wouldn't start. The power would cut out. It was like the house had a grip on us, and it wasn't going to let us go. And that basement, I still can't explain what I saw down there. But I know one thing. Whatever was in that basement, it's still there. Now let me ask you again. Do you believe in the supernatural? Because after living through this, I'm not sure what I believe anymore. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something like this. And trust me, if you ever hear strange noises from your basement, maybe it's better to leave them alone. After that night, everything changed. We didn't talk about it, but the fear was there, lingering in the air. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights felt like a warning, like the house was alive and it was watching us. But none of us wanted to be the first to say it. Mike, usually the life of the party, was the first to crack. A few nights later, we were sitting around the kitchen table trying to act normal. He put his drink down and said, "We need to get out of here. I don't care what it takes." Sarah didn't even argue. She just nodded, and that scared me more than anything. Sarah was always the rational one, the one who would call us out for being paranoid. But now even she couldn't deny it. Something was terribly wrong. The problem was, we were trapped. It felt like the house had its claws in us, refusing to let go. Every time we tried to leave, something would stop us. The doors would jam, or the car wouldn't start. Even when we tried to call for help, our phones would lose signal the second we mentioned leaving the house. And then, there were the dreams. It started with Sarah. She came downstairs one morning, pale as a ghost, her hands shaking as she clutched her coffee mug. "I had a nightmare," she whispered. "I was in the basement, but I wasn't alone." Mike and I exchanged a glance, but neither of us said anything. We didn't want to admit that we'd had the same dream. That basement, it was always the basement. In my dream, I was standing at the bottom of the stairs, just like that night. But this time, I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, staring at the far corner of the room. And there it was, the shadow. It was darker than before, more solid, like it was becoming something real. And then, it spoke. A voice, low and distorted, whispering my name. Tom. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. But the worst part wasn't the dream. It was the feeling that came with it. Like something had followed me back into the real world. Like that voice was still there, in the back of my mind, waiting. Mike, too, started to change. He became more withdrawn, jumpy. One night, I found him sitting in the living room, staring at the basement door. "Do you hear it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The voices. They're getting louder." I didn't want to admit it, but he was right. The whispers had become more frequent, more distinct, and it wasn't just at night anymore. During the day when everything should have been normal, you could still hear them. Faint, but there, like they were just waiting for us to slip up. Then, one night, it all came to a head. It was late. Sarah had gone to bed early again, and Mike was upstairs in his room. I was in the living room, trying to focus on a book, anything to distract myself. But the whispers started up again, this time louder than ever before. I could hear them coming from the basement. Without thinking, I grabbed the flashlight and headed to the basement door. I don't know what possessed me to go down there again, but it felt like I didn't have a choice, like the house was pulling me in. The second I opened the door, the temperature dropped. The air felt thick, suffocating, and my legs felt heavy as I descended the stairs. The basement was darker than I remembered, the shadows swallowing the weak beam of my flashlight. And then I heard it. The voice. Tom. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was clear, unmistakable. And it was coming from the corner of the room. I shined the light over, my heart pounding in my chest, and there it was. The shadow was no longer just a figure. It had taken shape, a twisted humanoid form that seemed to writhe in the darkness. Its eyes, or what I thought were eyes, glowed faintly, staring right at me. And then it spoke again, louder this time. "Tom, come closer." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the spot, and I felt myself being pulled toward it. The air around me grew colder, the smell of decay stronger. Suddenly I heard footsteps behind me, and before I could turn around, Mike was there, grabbing my arm. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, yanking me back up the stairs. The basement door slammed shut behind us, and we both stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the door. Neither of us said anything for a long time. We didn't need to. We both knew what we'd seen. The next morning, Sarah was gone. Her bed was empty, her belongings untouched, but she was nowhere to be found. We searched the entire house, the yard, even the neighborhood, but there was no trace of her. The police said she must have run off, maybe overwhelmed by everything that had happened. But Mike and I knew better. The house had taken her. We stayed for another week, hoping she would come back. But the whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. And then, one night, as I was lying in bed, I heard it again. "Tom." This time the voice was right next to me. I bolted upright, my heart pounding, and there, standing at the foot of my bed, was the shadow. It was no longer confined to the basement. It had come for me. I don't remember much after that. Mike found me the next morning, curled up in the corner of my room, shaking uncontrollably. He said I kept repeating the same thing over and over. "It's here." We left that day. We didn't pack. We didn't care about the house or our belongings. We just ran. But even now I can still feel it. The house, the shadow, the voices. They're still with me. And sometimes late at night I swear I can still hear them calling my name. Even after we left, we couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't done with us. Mike and I went our separate ways, but we kept in touch. Barely. It was like neither of us wanted to talk about what happened, like saying it out loud would make it real again. But then, a few weeks later, Mike called me. His voice was shaky, panicked. "Tom, it's happening again," he said. "I've been hearing it. At night. The whispers. The voice. It's back. My heart sank. I hadn't heard the whispers since we left, but I knew they would find me eventually. The house wasn't just a place. It was something much worse, something that had latched onto us, refusing to let go. I tried to reassure Mike, but deep down I knew there was no escape. Once the house had its hooks in you, it never let go. Days passed, and the nightmares started again. I was back in the basement, standing in the dark, the shadow looming in front of me. This time, it didn't speak. It just stood there, watching, waiting. And then, one night, it finally came for me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the sound of whispers filling my room. The voice was louder than ever before, right in my ear. "Tom!" I shot up in bed, frantically scanning the room, but there was nothing there. I grabbed my phone and called Mike. The phone rang once, then twice, before going to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Panic set in. I threw on some clothes and raced to Mike's apartment, my mind racing with all the horrible possibilities. By the time I got there, it was too late. The door to his apartment was unlocked, the lights flickering. Inside, the air was thick, heavy, just like it had been in the house. I found Mike in his living room, sitting in the dark, staring at the corner of the room. His eyes were wide, his face pale, and his hands were trembling. "Mike," I whispered, stepping closer. He didn't respond. His gaze was fixed on something I couldn't see. And then, as I got closer, I heard it. The whispers. They were faint at first, barely audible, but they grew louder with each step I took. And then, in the corner of the room, I saw it. The shadow. It was back, darker and more solid than ever before. It stood there, twisted and unnatural, its glowing eyes fixed on Mike. And then slowly, it turned its gaze toward me. "Tom." I froze, unable to move. The air around me grew colder, my breath coming out in visible puffs. The shadow took a step forward, and for the first time I saw it clearly. It wasn't just a shadow. It was something much worse. Something ancient, malevolent. Something that had been waiting for us all along. "Tom, come closer," it whispered again, its voice low and distorted. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed, held in place by some unseen force. The shadow reached out, its hand extending toward me, and for a brief moment, I thought it was over. But then suddenly, Mike moved. He lunged forward, grabbing the shadow by its arm, pulling it away from me. "Go!" he screamed, his voice filled with desperation. "Get out of here, Tom!" I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, not looking back, not stopping until I was outside, gasping for air. I wanted to go back to help Mike, but I knew I couldn't. Whatever that thing was, it had him now. I called the police, but when they arrived, there was no sign of Mike. His apartment was empty, like he had never been there. But I knew the truth. The house had taken him. I moved far away after that, changed my name, changed my life, trying to forget everything that had happened. But the truth is, you can't outrun something like that. It stays with you, haunts you. Even now I can still feel it. The whispers, the cold, and sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear it again. Tom. And I know, one day, it will come for me too. If you enjoyed the video and couldn't stop watching until the end, then we've done our job right. The story still has so many twists and hidden secrets, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts and theories in the comments. Tell us, what was the scariest moment for you? And what do you think happened to Tom in the end? If you're into horror and suspense, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories. And if you know someone who loves this kind of content, share the video with them and let them experience the chills with us. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when a new story drops. And give us a like if you're ready for more. Now tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?